Welcome back to the Gridiron Address. Last week we did NFC free agency. This week it's AFC. I had to bring in a couple AFC fans. You see him. He's got the Raiders hat on. It's his first time on the show. Welcome, Cody Johnson of Drew Code Sports Talk. Cody, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Aaron, man. I appreciate the invite. I was humbled to get a text from you, so I'm hoping I can perform well for you. But yeah, I'm dying to get into some AFC stuff because there's been a lot of news in the NFL world that's come out just this week, so I'm ready to dive into it.
And he's back again after missing a few weeks, but co-host of the show, Chris Deluca, resident Steelers fan. Chris, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. Happy to be back on. Happy I had a little bit of time finally on a Sunday afternoon to be able to get back on this show because, I mean, we were carrying it throughout the regular season. I missed a little bit, but here I am back.
Now, Cody, we're going to kick it off with your Raiders in the AFC West, picking sixth overall, a mess of a quarterback situation, but they got Brock Bowers, potential best tight end in the league. He had the best season of a tight end this past year, so he's already got an argument. But what would you like to see your Raiders do in free agency and the draft to potentially make a push for a wild card or just improve the team in general?
Well, let's start with the quarterback position first. Let's stop doing our bargain shopping and getting, Gardner Minshew. I know that AOC was drafted by the Raiders during one of the previous regimes, and he showed flashes, but of course, I think he just got kind of caught up in turnover when it came to head coaches that, who knows if he'll be, a starting type of quarterback or, a backup. So I think the Raiders are going to move away from that. For the Raiders, I can see what they will do in free agency. We'll probably get like a bridge style quarterback. Obviously, there's been several reports of Sam Darnold tied to the team, Russell Wilson because of Pete Carroll, Justin Fields just because of the mobility factor and what Chip Kelly might be able to do with him in that offense. But if I'm the Raiders, I would be down with the bridge quarterback like a Sam Darnold, someone that maybe is ready to win at the moment, but gives us a chance to develop somebody. That way, if we can't allot, a first round pick to a quarterback, maybe we can wait into the second, maybe even the third round and get maybe some of the hidden gems that might potentially be there to where Pete Carroll and Chip Kelly can kind of coach them up and develop them. And there's no rush to really get there. And I think just a couple of those tweaks and also signing some key defensive players on the Raiders side of the football, that might make us pretty competitive within the in the AFC West. And no, I do not want Aaron Rodgers. I repeat, do not want Aaron Rodgers. He's got New York Giants written all over him. Jason, you're welcome.
Jason throwing out a Devontae Adams return to the Raiders.
I'd be down for that, but not Aaron Rodgers.
No, and Chris, Cody threw out Russell Wilson as a potential bridge quarterback for the Raiders to sign. As a Steelers fan, you obviously watched a lot of Russell Wilson this past season. What would you think of a signing like that for Vegas?
And when I was looking at this before, he was actually the number one guy that I had when we said we were going to talk about the Raiders first. I really think that he'd be a great bridge quarterback because while he wasn't fantastic, he's a great mentor. So if you do draft a quarterback in the lower rounds and maybe he can become something, he can be a great mentor. I think he did very well mentoring Justin Fields, and he still limits the turnovers and he still shows sparks or shadows of Mr. Unlimited. We always love saying that. And I didn't hate him as a Steelers quarterback. Obviously, I didn't want to be a long-term future guy. But with a combination of Pete Carroll being there, with Russell Wilson clearly still having something in him, I think his leadership skills could really add something to a Raiders locker room that has been very, very tumultuous recently.
Right. Another quarterback, though, too, that I think would be interesting for the Raiders, and it's another quarterback tied to Pete Carroll, because I don't know how gung-ho Pete Carroll is to bring in Russell Wilson, who's 36, but I would see like a quarterback like Geno Smith could be out there because I think Seattle would want to move off of that deal. Geno, I think, is 32, 33, so he's slightly younger than Russell Wilson. I think Pete Carroll has a better rapport with Geno because he kind of helped, save his career, for the lack of a better term. I think Geno Smith makes more sense if I'm the Raiders going bridge. If I'm going to choose one or the other over Wilson or Geno Smith, if I'm the Raiders, I'd go Geno Smith in that respect.
Anything for a Mountaineer to stay in the NFL starting.
For sure.
Podcast Smitty in the comments. Maybe he's coming back. Shannon, I want to get you on next week. At next week's episode, we're going to be doing a post-combine mock draft to give us a week to sit on the results from the combine.
I know he was on this last week saying that he didn't get an invite, so
I had a late change of plans and had to shift the time around, but we're going to get him back on. Moving on to the Broncos, who I thought had the most surprising season in the league. That defense looked electric. And Bo Nix was playing some phenomenal football down the stretch to get them into the wild card. What I think Denver really needs to do, get him another couple weapons, get him a wide receiver too, and get him a tight end. I don't think Adam Troutman's going to cut it for him. And this is a great draft class to need a tight end. There's going to be a lot of talent at that position where they're going to be picking later part of the first round. But Chris, what do you want to see Denver do in free agency and possibly the draft as well?
I would love to see them get a weapon, but also I'd love offensive weapon. But I'd also love to go and see them go for a linebacker, maybe improve the already stout defense that they had. Hey, Zach Bond had a generational year with the Philadelphia Eagles, and he's a free agent. If they could go for him, I wouldn't mind that. And I think Denver is willing to go and push out that amount of money based on where they are right now. Kansas City, despite the fact that they're bringing the guys back together, Kansas City seems vulnerable. We all saw their Super Bowl performance. That division is winnable. The Chargers are the Chargers. They're just kind of treading water. I would go all out if I was Denver. I would go for Zach Bond. And with addition to that, I would be wanting to go for someone like T. Higgins, at the least Chris Godwin, a major difference maker on offense, something to take the pressure off of Courtland Sutton and also boost more confidence to a very great Bo Nix.
And Cody, Denver's got a couple key players leaving for him. Javonte Williams is a free agent and Cody Barton, a linebacker. How big of a priority do you think it is to keep continuity with this unit after the kind of season that they had?
I mean, obviously it's going to be super important. I think if I'm the Broncos, I would love to bolster like the running back position to make that offense a little bit more balanced because, they did pretty well in the passing game as the season wore on with a rookie, and they just didn't really have a whole lot of run support. So I'd like to see like maybe a free agency grab, maybe test to see if you can get somebody off of a team. Like Nick Chubb, for example, from the Browns would be a nice addition to this offense that could really move the ball down really help move the chain, so to speak. And then for the defensive side of the ball for the Broncos, honestly, they really need like another cornerback to pair with PS2. Like he's really the only one that's locking down one half of the field. And if he can have a counterpart, whether it's a rookie or somebody they sign in free agency, I think is help. Chris made a great point with having a linebacker support, which I think fortunately they have some ability to like wait on that, maybe draft it because their front is so tenacious and it does get after quarterbacks and it causes pressures. But if there was another cornerback that could at least hold down a side of the field that, Patrick Surtain is not on, I think it really would help bolster like how tenacious that defense is, because truthfully, that defense is what is negating like the growth in the AFC West when it was against, the Chargers or the Chargers or the Chiefs. The Broncos defense was really holding it down, especially in the secondary. So you bolster that up and they can do a lot of damage in the AFC West and make some big leaps that, everyone should be on notice for.
I love the Nick Chubb shout. I don't think you're going to have to pay him too much money coming off of an injury. Give him a 1 year, $5 million prove it kind of deal.
Yeah.
But Jason saying they need a running back one. Nix is the next Josh Allen. What do y'all think of that?
I think Bo Nix is a bit undersized for Josh Allen. I think Bo Nix is going to be a very good football thrower, of course. Obviously, he's in the NFL. He's shown flashes. I think he's going to be Drew Brees 2.0, but obviously not Drew Brees. I think he's going to play in that kind of style, and with Sean Payton being his head coach, I think he's going to play some efficient football. But I think that kind of disrespects Josh Allen in the sense of like what all he does for the Buffalo Bills, and it highlighted it this past season when Josh Allen won the MVP, and literally we didn't think that he had any offensive weapons to lead in the playoffs, and really it was Josh Allen that was helped leading that. Bo Nix, is he important to the Broncos? Sure, but I just don't know if I'm ready to put him on the same level as Josh Allen, not after 1 year at least.
I would just say that he stays in the pocket too much to be like Josh Allen. I mean, that's pretty much it, and I do agree with the importantness of you to your team. I think the Broncos are just more of a spread out when it comes to talent, as opposed to the Bills, which we'll be getting to here later about their team needs.
Yeah.
And moving on to another super surprising team out of the AFC West, the Chargers had a phenomenal season, absolutely exceeded expectations. Harbaugh went in there, changed that defense. Offense looked good. Pretty thin at wide receiver. You got Ladd McConkey, phenomenal rookie season. After that, Quentin Johnston can't always catch a pass when you think he's not going to. He gets a big pass, and then he disappears for the rest of the game. So I think much like the Broncos, getting Justin Herbert another weapon to throw to has got to be a big priority. And tight end again as well. Maybe Harbaugh reunites with Colston Loveland out of Michigan. Would not put it past him. I think that would be a great pick for the Chargers or the Broncos. But Cody, I know they're a division rival, but what do you think the Chargers need to do to get back to the playoffs?
Oh, man, I hope nothing. But to answer the question, I think, honestly, they need to address pass rushing because they're going to lose Mack and Bosa due to cap and age. So they really need to figure out what they're going to do to get young on the edges. I think their secondary is okay. I feel like with this second year within this defense, I feel like it will improve slightly. Offensively, though, yeah, you hit it right on the head, Aaron. Like, they need something more than McConkey. I would imagine that they may overpay for a veteran receiver that's in the market. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if a Stephon Diggs gets signed to the Chargers, just because I don't know if the Texans are going to keep Diggs. Diggs is going to have a market somewhere else. Chargers might fit that bill because they have somebody in McConkey who can play every single down, and maybe Stephon Diggs can at least take a little bit of pressure off that, or they can go to Diggs whenever McConkey is gardening into a lot of coverage. So I think that's a big part of it, but I'm very curious to see what they do in terms of running back, because I don't know if Dobbins is going to be back, and he was their workhorse. So I feel like, honestly, what's weird is the Chargers had the better record between, obviously, the Broncos and the Raiders, and yet I feel like a couple of more question marks about what are they going to do to retool? Because, it feels like they need a little bit of everything here and there. Like, they're good, but it feels like they need a little bit of everything to be like a talented team to be in the playoffs and a viable threat. And it feels like if they don't make all those moves, they're nothing more than maybe a potential wild card fringe type of team. And then it's a house of cards where you pull one out, it's all going to fall. That's what it feels like for me when I'm looking at the Chargers and their team.
And Jason throwing something absolutely crazy in the comments. Herbert's overrated and they got to trade him.
And unless it's the Giants offering a draft pick, then I'm sure he would be the biggest Justin Herbert fan. So,
but Chris, what do you want to see the Chargers do in free agency? They got the 6th most cap space in the league, so you could throw some money at a good wide receiver like a T. Higgins and a Hassan Reddick to get some help at edge.
I definitely agree with going for a wide receiver, and I think that all those are great options. T. Higgins would be great. Stephon Diggs coming off the injury, plus he's going to be probably a little bit overpaid, so they have the room for that. But I want to just touch on one thing: is that Justin Herbert was the 7th most sacked quarterback in the NFL. The 7th most sacked quarterback in the NFL, and they're losing Bradley Bozeman. I wouldn't mind seeing them go for a guy like Brandon Sheriff, James Daniels, or Zach Martin, just something at guard. Maybe you can move them over to move someone to center. I mean, they're losing their center, Bozeman, but still bolstering our offensive line would really help them out. I mean, look how the offensive line performed against a very, very weak front 7 Texans team. Like the Texans defense was not great this year. And then Texans defense looked like the 85 Bears defense in that wild card game. So I would love to see them go for any type of offensive line, but those are just some names I would use.
And I think Austin Corbett, a center leaving Carolina, obviously coming off an injury, but relatively cheap player that they can add in and get some support on offensive line, because really outside of Joe Alt, who had an insane rookie season, I don't think he allowed a sack, and he might have only allowed like 1 or 2 pressures all year. So they got a franchise left tackle in Alt, but obviously need some help. Jason saying get a wide receiver 2, 3, and 4. Johnston can't catch a cold. He's spot on with that, honestly. But moving on to the Chiefs, obviously atrocious end of their season. They got absolutely bullied in that Super Bowl. The final score was not indicative of how that game played out. The Chiefs got a couple touchdowns late in the 4th when the Eagles weren't even trying to put up points because the game was over by the time it hit the 4th quarter.
Yeah.
They're going to need help at wide receiver. Kelsey's getting up there in age a little bit. Noah Gray's not bad. I don't know if he's going to be a Kelsey replacement. But, Chris, what do you think the Chiefs need to do to get back to the Super Bowl and remain competitive?
Hey, I mean, this isn't real. This is our free agency show, but I still believe that there very well could be a Tyreek Hill reunion after his comments at the end of the Dolphins season. That would not surprise me when it comes to wide receiver. But again, you really, really need to bolster on defense because the Eagles made you look like absolute Swiss cheese. You looked terrible. Look, they franchise tagged Trey Smith, which was a really good decision, but still, there are some issues with the offensive line. There are still some issues with the secondary. They're losing Justin Reed. I wouldn't mind them going for a linebacker like Matthew Judon, Hassan Reddick, or trying to go for maybe a guy like Marcus Epps or Jeremy Chin too, a guy who had a pretty darn good year in Washington. That would help out too. But I don't think the Chiefs are going to spend a bunch of money on wide receiver, and that's because it's not their system. They run a very unique system where they don't really need a wide receiver one, and you've noticed a lot of successful teams have done that, and it's still been successful even after Tyreek Hill leaving. So I think go get Tyreek Hill and trade from Miami, give up minimal, and then go for a linebacker safety.
And Cody, what do you think Kansas City needs to do to get back to the Super Bowl and retool a little bit? Obviously, Rashee Rice, great year, went down with an injury, potential looming suspension for him. So we don't know how many games he's going to miss next year. But what do you want him to do in free agency?
Nothing, because I don't want them to be successful. Anyways, I'm sorry. This is one of the tougher divisional discussions, of course. But I think objectively, what the Chiefs need to do is they need to address their defense. They were in the bottom half of the league in terms of sacks. So obviously with Chris Jones in and out due to injury, and then just the front that they have is just not getting after the quarterback as much. They really relied on their secondary to bail them out. And of course, because there was no pressure, their secondary just, was having to play too long of coverage, which was leading to like longer throws or a breach in the defense. So they really need to address like edge rushing. They need to get a younger interior lineman. A linebacker, as what Chris mentioned, might be something that is in the cards as well. Receiver, though, I think is where they're probably going to spend minimally. I would not be surprised if this offseason they spend a majority of their money on a defense because you like what you said, Aaron. They have Rashee Rice that will be coming back. They still have Xavier Worthy, who is just lightning in a bottle. And, this was his rookie season. Imagine next year with his route running and his explosiveness. That could be a dangerous combination. I do think that, Travis Kelce coming back does help this offense a little bit because, again, he's so savvy in how it maneuvers in Andy Reid's system. And then Noah Gray, as you mentioned, is a great, secondary relief in terms of, a tight end. I do think that there is a ton of pressure, though, on Patrick Mahomes to kind of clean up how he plays quarterback a little bit because he's kind of gotten away with being able to be the most unpolished quarterback that is successful that we've seen, just his being able to improv in the pocket or leave the pocket and making wild throws. And I really feel like the Eagles, because they were able to take away that safety net of protection that he had, you see him making all sorts of crazy throws, untimely throws. He's just not able to connect. And I feel like Patrick Mahomes needs to find a way to kind of retool his foundation in a sense. So that way, maybe he's a little bit more decisive and not trying to take the top off the defense because they don't have Tyreek right now. And regardless if they do or they don't have him, defenses still won't let that happen because, again, they have Xavier Worthy, which they're trying to prevent. So I just think the Chiefs, they are so well coached that they don't have to do a lot to be a playoff team. But if they want to win the Super Bowl or go back, they're going to have to address a lot of things, maybe make some cap casualties. But for sure, the defense needs to be something that they really put a lot of money into because their defense, ironically enough, is what would help anchor their offense, where their offense would score a bunch of points. And then because whatever team that they're playing becomes one-dimensional, their defense would then just put a lot of pressure on the opposing quarterback and get into a turnover situation. And the Chiefs this year, they got into so many one-score opportunities that really didn't happen. And that's kind of on their defense to not protect leads and to not allow these leads to get bigger with stopping other teams. So the Chiefs have a lot of work to do, and I think it starts on the defensive side of the ball.
A name I want to throw out there and get y'all's opinion on is Chase Young. Obviously playing a little bit better than he has, but he's not panning out like we expected him to be when he went number 2 overall. He is still young. He's going to be turning 26 here shortly, and I think pairing a younger player like that with Steve Spagnuolo, he could potentially get the most out of Chase Young. Chris, what would you think of that signing for the Chiefs?
I think it would be a good idea. I mean, especially with his injury history. I mean, we all know what he did his rookie year. You remember, Aaron, how huge I was on him, when he went second overall. And then after his rookie year, I was like, I was right. And then I think it was mainly injuries that really took him down. And I really wished he could have been part of this Washington team that I really, really was so happy to see, not just because my roommate's a big Washington fan, but overall, I think that'd be a great idea to pair him with Steve Spagnuolo, and recover his career, because there's still a chance. I mean, he's only 26. There is still a chance for him, and Kansas City would be a great place for him to go.
Cody, what would you think of Chase Young going to Kansas City?
I'd absolutely hate that, but it would help their defense, which is exactly what we're talking about. But I actually think, like, when we'll talk about this later on down in the show, but I actually think, like, the Steelers should kick the tires on Chase Young and pair him next to Bosa. When we talk about the AFC North, I think that's a better pairing. But, I wouldn't be surprised if the Chiefs did, go after somebody like Chase Young if he's not locked down to a long-term deal, or maybe they find a way to fleece the Cleveland Browns in getting Garrett, which I hope not, but again, there's a world where that might happen. Yeah.
I don't want to see that at all. I mean,
yeah, I don't either.
Chase Young's leaving the Saints. They're in absolute cap hell, and they will be for the foreseeable future.
I mean, then maybe Cam Jordan goes to the Chiefs just because he's going to be hungry, and they need interior pressure to go next to Chris Jones. I mean, that would be an interesting pairing. Maybe you just bolster the interior and just let the outside kind of worry about itself. But the Saints could be a bargain sale for every single team if we're being honest. So who knows?
It really could. I might dislike Cam Jordan or the Chiefs as much as Myles Garrett just because he's one of my least favorite active Saints players. I've said a lot of less than stellar things about the Saints on this show, so we'll stop that for now. I can't get myself going on that again. But moving on to the AFC South, we're going to kick it off with the Tennessee Titans. Absolutely abysmal. They decided to keep rolling with Will Levis this season, and it backfired. Obviously, all the memes from this season from Levis were hilarious. I love it. I hope they passed on a quarterback just so we get to see more Will Levis memes next season. But it feels like they're going quarterback at number one. But the Giants and Raiders are both interested in trading up. Jason, I was texting him earlier about that. He is not a big fan of the Giants making that move because they need too much, and he doesn't want them giving up draft capital to just go up 2 spots. Mm-hmm. But, Chris, where do the Titans start in free agency? They've got the 9th most cap space in the league, just under $54 million. So they've got some money to play with, but who are they realistically going to be able to bring in?
I mean, there's so much, and it's one of those teams, that I struggle to talk about, if I'm being honest to you guys. The same, like with the Colorado Rockies on Dugout Debrief. I just struggle to talk about them because it's so much to talk about of what they need. I mean, I gotta say that you want to start, if you draft a quarterback, then you want to probably be leaning towards maybe a defensive end, and I had a few names here. Chase Young, probably unrealistic, but like Marcus Davenport's there. Just older veterans you can get at a discount rate, and then just offensive linemen to protect your young quarterback. Like you have Morgan Moses, you have Trenton Brown. I'm kind of at a loss for words. The only last point that I can make with that is maybe go and try and get a guy like Jacoby Brissett, maybe try and get Marcus Mariota back, maybe try and get Drew Lock back, and maybe you can catch lightning in a bottle like you did with Ryan Tannehill for 2 years. And I don't know, again, using my Rockies reference, I struggle to talk about teams like that.
Do you think they'd be able to bring in a veteran quarterback like a Jacoby Brissett or maybe a Marcus Mariota who can go out there and play some like respectable football on occasion?
Lightning in a bottle. I mean, they caught it with Ryan Tannehill. We wrote him off after he left Miami, and he led. I mean, I said this a few shows ago that they're tied for the best run to a conference championship in the 2000s, if you ask me, them and the Commanders this past year. So, I mean, who knows? But Tennessee had a lot more weapons back then. So,
Cody, what's step one for Tennessee to start to build their way back to relevance?
Wow. Well, I mean, Chris, the analogy about the Colorado Rockies and like what they need, it's so true because they've been in purgatory for like 10 years. I mean, it's so much that they need to do. It's sad. And I feel like Tennessee right now is very, very similar. Like, what don't they need help with is probably an easier question to answer than what do they need help with. And if I were them, I would probably go Cam Ward at quarterback, and I would just end this Will Levis experiment. It's not going to work. Drink your mayonnaise and your coffee at home. It's just not going to work here on this team. However, though, if I were to strategically think, like, how can I get this team at least remotely competitive? I think then the most intriguing thing I would think about is maybe trading the number one pick for multiple picks within the same draft or next draft to build out like younger depth. And then that way you're well under contract thresholds and salary cap. And then I probably would overpay for, a bridge quarterback, maybe a Jameis Winston, Jacoby Brissett. Sure, that he's like a fine game management manager. Marcus Mariota reunion might be in the cards. That might be something. Daniel Jones, if they feel like, he's somebody that could help out. I think what makes it tough is like there's no true direction on where the Titans are going to go because, again, they've got so much to cover. Who knows what they want to do? And I think the smartest thing for them to do would be focus back in the defense, like where they kind of made a lot of a name for themselves, and then build out the offense from there. Because I really feel like in this draft, if they get enough draft picks, they can really build a formidable defense that's young. And then that gives them an opportunity to build in the draft, maybe next year for a quarterback, and maybe get, whatever quarterback prospect that's hot next season, not Arch Manning, because he's not going to go to Tennessee. But that's what I would suspect if I'm Tennessee. I'm thinking about maybe we should multiply this one draft pick into several and get some players that maybe we can get some production immediately.
I feel like you hit the nail on the head with that. This feels like a textbook situation where the team needs to trade down. I think they would get the most out of your Raiders coming up 5 spots from 6. But, I mean, what would you think about the Raiders moving up to first overall?
I think I'm good with that as long as if we did that, that means we're all in on getting a franchise quarterback. And that would probably be at the blessing of Tom Brady, because I would suspect if we did that, we'd be probably going Shedeur Sanders number 1 just because of the Tom Brady connection. And, it was reported that they're basically like a mentor-mentee type of relationship. So I wouldn't be opposed to that. Like, that's something I can see the Raiders doing. Will we do that? Will the Titans be willing to do so? I don't know, because the Titans might be able to get a pretty good deal from another team. But again, who knows on draft night? Like, I can very easily see a scenario where the Cowboys overpay to get the number 1 spot to draft a quarterback or draft whatever player that they want. Like, I just feel like the Tennessee Titans are willing to make a deal with any team who wants the number 1 pick if they're not sure who they want. Would I like the Raiders to do it? Sure. But also, I don't want to be a knee-jerk reaction to whatever the plan of this new regime is, because we just need something different than what we've had the last few seasons. Tennessee, though, needs a complete overhaul. Like, if it's not nailed down to the floor, it's got to go kind of a situation.
And moving on to the Jacksonville Jaguars, Brian Thomas Jr., insane rookie season. They got a good wide receiver 1 there for Trevor Lawrence. Running back room's weird. Travis Etienne just not panning out. Tank Bigsby's looked solid, but he's probably not the answer either. And that defense was bad. Second most yards given up, only to the Carolina Panthers. But we talked about that last week. Obviously, Panthers defense terrible. Most passing yards given up. I think priority 1 has got to be fix that secondary. You're not going to win games if you're getting lit up like that on a week-to-week basis. I could also see Liam Cohen wanting to bolster up that offense as well and make that priority 1, get a good wide receiver in, get a solid running back. I feel like a Najee Harris in Jacksonville might be somewhat realistic, not necessarily a huge name, but somebody who could go in there and get some solid carries. But Cody, what do you think Jacksonville needs to do to get into the playoffs next season.
That's interesting because I have in my notes here that I expect the Jaguars to have the number 1 overall pick at the end of this upcoming season. I don't think that they are a well-built team. I think Trevor Lawrence and Brian Thomas Jr. is fine. I'm actually not that sold on Liam Cohen. I have some apprehensions. I feel like he's a popular coordinator that's out there that hopefully he does well, but I don't like the whole like situation that turned out where, you know, he declined to go to Jacksonville originally, wanted to stay with the Buccaneers, decided then to go back to Jags once they fired their GM, and the relationship tarnishing from that. So I don't know if Cohen is worthy of all that, but if I'm the Jaguars, I think the smartest thing I would do is obviously we got to address the defense, because just like what you pointed out, Aaron, it was atrocious. So need to figure out what we can do with our draft picks to do that. And also, I think there needs to be a scenario where we think about what are we doing with Trevor Lawrence long term? Like, are we keeping him? Can we trade him to get some assets, like some draft picks, and get out from that contract? Because in my opinion, like, Trevor Lawrence is not living up to number 1 overall expectations. And right now, the Jaguars, in my opinion, would be on the cusp of getting another number 1 overall pick next season. And there's not a whole lot that they can do to really stop that. Like, they did have Calvin Ridley at one point. Now he's with Tennessee. Like, Brian Thomas Jr., who was a nice rookie, who do you pair him with? And I just don't see really any hope for the Jaguars of what they can do, because I feel like they're in a worse situation than or at least not worse, on the same level as Tennessee in terms of like how far from prosperity they are from anything, just with how their situations are.
I feel like they are closer than Tennessee because they actually have some good pieces. Granted, it's only 2 players. You got Trevor Lawrence and Brian Thomas Jr., but that's at least something to build off of. That defense, I feel like, is what's really holding them back. Just an atrocious unit. But Chris, what do you think Jacksonville needs to do to build themselves back up and make a playoff push and hopefully avoid another number 1 overall pick?
I mean, I think that they're the definition of so close yet so far. I mean, this team with that division could make the playoffs in theory with very, very minimal wins next year if they could just continue to build offensively. I mean, I think that they should stick with Trevor Lawrence. I still think that he's the guy. I think that he's been there long enough and he lived up to the hype at least long enough to have built a presence in that locker room, built respect. But I got to start defensively. I mean, we talked about the points given up. Go for a linebacker, maybe Preston Smith. Go for maybe Justin Reed, a safety, someone like that. BJ Hill, Byron Murphy, something like that. And then, I mean, I don't necessarily think that they should go wide receiver simply because you have Brian Thomas Jr. And if you can get Christian Kirk healthy, which I was really against that contract signing. That was a huge overpay for a mediocre wide receiver too. And it's not necessarily that he's bad. I just think they overpaid him. Get a low risk wide receiver to take some pressure off of Brian Thomas Jr. Maybe go for like Mike Williams. You have Hollywood Brown as well as a free agent, a guy who can get a lot of stuff done. And then most importantly, offensive line. You're losing Brandon Sheriff. You've got to go offensive line. But again, I believe them to be the most so close yet so far team because they could either make the playoffs next year as probably having the least amount of wins of any team that makes the playoffs as like a 9-win team, 8-win team, or they could have the first overall pick. It's no in between.
And they're in a weird situation with cap. They're 17th most in the league at $33 million. So they're not going to be able to spend big money. I feel like a Justin Simmons, give him like $6 million a year for a couple seasons. That's probably the biggest name they might be able to get. And that would help their pass defense a lot. But moving on to the Colts, the Anthony Richardson experiment feels like it's close to failing. He has not developed as a passer at all. And there's talks they're bringing in a veteran quarterback to compete with him. Cody, what quarterback would you like to see the Colts bring in to compete with Richardson?
So I actually noted this before the report came out, and I actually think Daniel Jones would be an interesting signing here just because of his mobility. I think he would probably run the offense very similar to how they want to do it with Anthony Richardson, with Shane Steichen. Although I will say, though, the gamble with that is Shane Steichen, in my opinion, is on his last year in Indianapolis. Like, I don't see a scenario where they could have a mediocre season with as much like drama that happened with literally Pat McAfee calling out the leadership on his show about like, losers don't have this, losers do this, not winners. And I just don't see a scenario where Shane Steichen survives after the season if they don't make any sort of leaps and bounds. So Daniel Jones is a quarterback that I can see. Justin Fields is another quarterback I think that the Colts might bring in, and honestly would probably be the best opportunity for Justin Fields just because he's most likely to be on a team that might start him, because Anthony Richardson, not only is he an unreliable passer, he's under 50% for his career, and his turnover interception ratio is atrocious, but also he's hardly healthy. Like, he missed a great portion of his first 3 years that he's been in the NFL. And when he's not on the field, the Colts are better. So it's not even saying that you help us win more. In fact, like, they win when you're not on the field. That's not a great advertisement for you as a franchise quarterback. So Justin Fields, Daniel Jones, I think are players. Obviously, I want to keep that receiving core in there because I think they're pretty underrated. So whatever I have to do to keep that core together is what I would do, because to be truthful, their defense, they've got some good pieces on the defensive side to where if they can just kind of get this offense like looking a little bit more mature and straighten up a little bit, they could be a team that could challenge the Texans in the South and possibly take home the division, because this is a pretty weak division. It is by far like an up for anyone's grabs. And had it not been for the Texans just outlasting everybody, who knows? Maybe the Colts could have caught them at some point. But I think what the Colts need to do is they need to figure out, like, if Anthony Richardson isn't the guy, we need to get some players that are going to do that and be productive when we put them in there. And also, like, what are they going to do following that? Like, is Shane Steichen going to change the culture and be more of a, okay, we're not going to allow this, rather than, from what it sounds like, just let everyone kind of do their own thing and then hopefully we show up on Sunday? Like, we need to put some maturity in this team.
Chris, what do you think the Colts need to do? You know, what veteran quarterback do you want them to bring in, and what else do you think they need to address?
I do unfortunately think that it is time to move on from Anthony Richardson, and I think he really did suffer from the syndrome of just not being in college long enough, just not having the experience, and he came into the NFL unprepared. And while that may have, however, that affected his value, that's a hypothetical. We won't even talk about that. I do think that that experiment is over, as Cody said. They're better when he's not out there, and they were better with Joe Flacco, and that's not a great thing. On a sort of not really necessarily a side note, I would love to see them go for a veteran tight end. Actually, I think similar to the Texans, they've kind of always had really bad tight ends. You know, I mean, it's been Mo Alley Cox the past few years. He's a free agent. I wouldn't mind seeing them go for a guy like Mike Gesicki or Tyler Conklin, who was pretty solid with the New York Jets.
Michael Mayer is available for trade, according to the Raiders. That would be a good addition. Pretty young, too, for that team.
And like I said, a veteran quarterback wouldn't be the worst, or just a guy like Justin Fields. I'm obviously biased. I'm going to talk about this and talk about the Steelers. I would rather see Justin Fields stay in the Yinzer land, but I do think that would fit him. Pretty much anyone. It's going to be a bridge year. The only other last take on the Colts that I really will give is they could be one of those outside teams that tries and trades up to number one. I mean, call me crazy, but I think that they're at a crossroads, and that wouldn't be the worst move to go and actually try and trade for that number one pick, as we mentioned before. But who knows if the Titans do that within their own division?
Good point.
I don't think they would. But moving on, last team in the AFC South, the Texans, they outlasted the pack and managed to win the division and cooked the Chargers in the playoffs. I think wide receiver is going to need to be addressed. You got Stephon Diggs leaving. I don't think they're going to pay him what he's going to want to be paid. And Tank Dell coming off a dislocated knee, torn ACL, MCL, and LCL. We don't know if he's going to be back next season. So at that point, they're down to just Nico Collins. So they need to get help in that wide receiver room. After that, you got Robert Woods and Xavier Hutchinson out of Iowa State. Looking kind of bleak defensively. Derek Stingley Jr., obviously phenomenal. Jeff Okudah leaving as well. I think they're going to need to get secondary help to pair with Derek Stingley Jr., who's a phenomenal cornerback. But Chris, your former favorite team, what do you think their priority is in free agency this year?
Well, going back to the point I made a few teams ago, CJ Stroud was the second most sacked quarterback, only behind poor Caleb Williams, bless his soul. 52 times we saw CJ Stroud go down, and that is one of the major reasons of what held them back, why they really weren't as good as we thought they were going to be into this year. So you got to address the offensive line issue. You know, we've already mentioned those names like Ronnie Stanley, Tyrone Smith. But I would love to see them go for a guy like Mekhi Becton, who had a huge – I was big on him when he got drafted, and he had a huge bounce back year with Philadelphia Eagles this year, winning that Super Bowl. When it comes to wide receiver, I'm not really sure how they're doing on cap room, but if they had enough, I would love to see them go for a guy like Godwin. I mean, I really do think that their receiving room was very, very good this year. It just had a string of bad luck. Tank Dell getting injured, Stephon Diggs getting injured. It really did not put them in a great spot. So I would love to see them go with a guy like Godwin, maybe an Amari Cooper as well, who couldn't really find it in Buffalo with Josh Allen, but maybe you could find it with CJ Stroud.
I will say the Texans are not doing good in cap room. They are in the negative. It's only 309,000. So
disregard my Godwin point. Then
they're not
cap room. So
they're not bringing in any big name guys.
Disregard that.
But Cody, what do you think Houston needs to do? Obviously, offensive line, a massive problem this year. And I think that's the reason that we saw CJ Stroud have a sophomore slump. I know this is a free agency show, but this offensive line draft class is deep. I think Armand Membo could be there later in the first round for him. But in terms of free agency, what would you like to see Houston do?
I think what they need to do is this is going to be a cap casualty kind of offseason for them. I would be surprised if Joe Mixon returns to the team. I think he's probably a cap casualty with his age and the salary that he is holding on right now, especially if the Houston Texans are upside down in it right now. Also, Dalton Schultz could be another player that might be a cap casualty. Who knows on the defensive side who they're not going to be able to allow back, because you got to pay some of these players, especially with how well that they played this past season. I think they did a pretty good showing against the Kansas City Chiefs in the divisional round. And so you want to retain as much of that defense as possible. But, you know, if you can find a way to get out of cap purgatory for the Houston Texans, I think you need to go full court press on T. Higgins to pair next to Nico Collins to save a little bit of money. I agree with Chris, like Amari Cooper would be a great wide receiver to pair next to Nico Collins, because you just need Amari Cooper who can run routes. Yes, he's, in his 30s, but like just the presence and how smart he is when it comes to reading defenses and how he can help lead that offense a little bit. Because now their new offensive coordinator for the Texans comes from the Sean McVay tree. So that they're going to spread this ball around a lot. So I think that they are going to want to find some wide receivers that are able to run routes in a strategic manner and not just fly down the field like what they were trying to do with this last offense. Because don't get me wrong, Tank Dell is a really good receiver. He probably won't be back next season at all. So let's just not assume that at all. But with Nico Collins, he's definitely by far the best player that they have on the offensive side of the ball. And then a steep drop from that and then nothing, So we really need to address whether it is cutting a few players here and there to make room for that. Devontae Adams might be another player that I could see maybe makes his way to the Texans if he's, cut by the New York Jets. So again, just a veteran presence to be strategic with their route running, I think is what Houston needs. And I'm very curious to see how CJ Stroud bounces back from a very bad sophomore slump, in my opinion, from what he did in his rookie year to step back the way that he did. Maybe that was offensive play calling and coaching. So we'll see how this new OC does, but I'm very curious to see how CJ Stroud moves forward, because in my opinion, this offense means nothing if CJ Stroud isn't how he was his rookie year.
And moving on to the AFC East, this team's going to be fun to talk about. The New England Patriots, they have the most cap in the NFL. They have who we think could be their franchise quarterback in Drake May. I think they are throwing all the money they can at T. Higgins to get him in there. if he's not going to go back to Cincinnati, and New England's going to be able to offer more money. So I feel like that is an incredibly realistic signing with the kind of cap space they have. But Cody, what do you think the Patriots can do in free agency? Do they get a marquee player like a T. Higgins?
Well, I think T. Higgins would probably be something that they would love to do. However, with recent reports that I've seen, we now have to wonder, are the Bengals, how close are they to signing Jamar Chase? Because they seem to be fumbling this bag with Jamar Chase. So what if it's not T. Higgins? What if it's Jamar Chase that finds his way to New England to be paired with Drake May and to start this whole Patriots dynasty all over again? I don't know how likely that is, and I'm sure Chris would love that, to dethrone the Bengals' power as much as possible. But, you know, again, I think what we're now talking about with the Patriots is they're actually going to be spenders in the market for like receivers and offensive talent, which they haven't been when Bill Belichick was there. So this is a very unique position that they are in. And I'd love to see them pay a lot for a productive receiver, because Drake May absolutely needs that. And he needs offensive line help. So like, I know that Joe Milton Jr., he's on that team. He's probably going to garner a lot of like draft capital if you flip him to a team that really needs a quarterback. And then you can start bolstering your offensive line in that fashion. So I think if I were the Patriots, I would find a way to get T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, whatever big name receiver that is looking for a payday. Tyreek Hill, I would be sending as much money or capital to get somebody to help Drake May and be an offensive presence in this new Patriots dynasty, with Josh McDaniels being back, which is ironic enough. But that's what I would like to see for the Patriots.
Chris, what do you think the Patriots are going to do? Do they make a crazy move for a Jamar Chase, or do they throw stupid money at T. Higgins and bring him in?
I just feel like, I mean, even with Belichick maybe or maybe not being at UNC, I think that's, you know, still we'll see how that turns out. I still think it's an un-Patriots move to spend that much money on a wide receiver, especially a wide receiver. It's so out of character for them. I think they're going to build stuff slow from the ground up back. I mean, they knew it was coming. They knew their mortality. I mean, when Brady left, they made the playoffs one more time after that, barely. They knew that it was going to end at some point. So I still think that they should go and just bolster the defense, but make sure to give Drake May a weapon. Again, I've mentioned the guy a few times, a guy like Preston Smith, something like that, who's going to be garnering a decent amount of money. But as opposed to going for some huge wide receiver, I don't necessarily think that they're going to go for a guy like Chase or a guy like T. Higgins. It wouldn't surprise me if they go for a more value pick, like an Amari Cooper, as we mentioned, coming off a down year, or Keenan Allen, something like that. But I don't see them spending really big because it's just so out of character for that organization.
Could also see them going for a Hollywood Brown or Darius Slayton kind of player. And this guy, I threw him out there last week, Deontay Johnson, had a solid start.
Just about to say that. Yeah.
Solid start to his season in Carolina, gets traded and doesn't play the rest of the year. Obviously, some attitude issues there. Maybe he ends up in Pittsburgh. We know they love their diva wide receivers, but what do y'all think is going to happen with Deontay Johnson? Because we saw him in a bad Carolina offense look like a pretty good wide receiver. I mean, where's he going to end up, Cody?
Honestly, like the New England Patriots, if they brought him in, makes the most sense, just because let's assume they're not ready to win now. They do need a receiver that they could just throw the ball at like numerous times. Like that fits Deontay Johnson. That was his biggest gripe with the Houston Texans, with the Ravens when he was on the team, is that he wasn't utilized, in his opinion, the right way, where they have other weapons. They have a team aspect that they are trying to grow. So there is no reason why they need to focus only on Deontay Johnson. Whereas the Patriots, that would fit that mold. Like, you want a guy who is willing to run every single route, be the number one guy on that receiving room, and you don't have to pay him an arm and a leg. Deontay Johnson fits that bill. And if you draft another younger receiver, you just have them, in the wings ready to go, and let Deontay Johnson, try to play his way into a brand new deal. So I really like that take, Aaron, and that name, because I was just thinking that when Chris was saying, I don't see them spending big money, because the only other thing New England would do is find a receiver that's ready to prove it and get as much production out of him before they would release him after one season. So that would fit the bill, in my opinion.
Chris, Jason saying maybe he goes to the 49ers or the Raiders continue their streak of disgruntled wide receivers. But what do you think is going to happen with Deontay Johnson?
Dallas Cowboys, just to make Michael mad. No, I'm joking.
Or the New York Giants to make Jason mad, because that's a interesting signing too.
That actually would make a little bit more sense. I mean, I still think Wan'Dale Robinson is a solid wide receiver 1 to 2-ish there. I actually liked Wan'Dale Robinson. He's really good red zone wide receiver. But in all seriousness, I got to say that he's a buy low, high ceiling but very low basement kind of guy. Going back to the Jaguars, I didn't even think about that. Jaguars wouldn't be a bad place for him to find a home. Chicago Bears, I mean, maybe take a little bit of pressure off of DJ Moore there, give Caleb Williams a little bit of help. He can use it all he can get. And, I mean, that's got to be the extent of it. And then New England, like you guys are talking about, because you got to be talking about teams that either have one wide receiver 1 and have basically no wide receiver 2, or a team like Tennessee that basically it's no wide receiver 1 or 2.
And moving on to the New York Jets, Aaron Glenn is not in a position to succeed. They are a mess right now. Hassan Reddick's going to be gone, looking like Aaron Rodgers is gone. And Devontae Adams, if Rodgers is gone, I don't know if he's going to want to stick around with the Jets for that kind of rebuild, getting older later on in his career. I honestly don't know what to say for this Jets team. Quarterback's a mess. They're not necessarily in a great place to get one. They're not a marquee destination. I don't think a Sam Darnold reunion would work well. I think he's probably the best quarterback that's on the market. I don't think that would be good for him. I want Darnold back in Minnesota. That would be the best thing for his career. But Chris, what are the Jets going to do? How are they going to solve the quarterback problem? And defensively, can Aaron Glenn get Hassan Reddick back with the Jets? And wide receiver, do they pair somebody new with Garrett Wilson? Do you think they can hold on to Devontae Adams?
Again, similar to the Titans, I use the Rockies analogy. It's so hard because this team has been, outside of a random time in the early 2010s, this team has been in a downward spiral. Do I think Devontae Adams will return if Rodgers leaves? More than likely not. Adams still has some value. He still showed how good he can be with the Jets, and it wouldn't surprise me if he just goes to a team like the Rams or something like that. Going back, you guys did the NFC conversation last week. I think that'd be a great fit for Devontae Adams. I mean, who do they go for? Well, I can't even put names out there because it's not an ideal destination. Neither New York team is an ideal destination, but I mean, I got to say, you just got to sit back, collect draft picks, and just kind of get low risk kind of guys. They have Breece Hall, who looked really good, but maybe try and go for like Marcus Epps. I know they're going to have to go for offensive line. They're going to have to go for offensive line because they're losing Tyrone Smith and Morgan Moses. Like, it's so hard to say. And I really don't think they're going to be in a point to contend anytime soon. I feel so bad for Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall.
And I feel bad for Aaron Glenn too. I don't know if this head coaching stint's going to pan out too well for him. He's joining up at a rough time. Hopefully he can get it together. I think wide receiver wise, you're going to be looking at throwing like a few $1 million at veterans like a DJ Chark, Mike Williams, Robert Woods, guys who you're only going to have to spend $2-3 million on, because the Jets only have $11 million in cap space. So they're probably going to be in a cap casualty situation like some other teams. But Cody, what are the Jets going to do? I think quarterback is a massive issue for them, with Rodgers likely to be gone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if I'm the Jets, here's what I'm doing. I am putting Sauce Gardner and Bryce Hall up for sale today. I'm going to get as many draft picks as I can, because Aaron Rodgers deal, Devontae Adams deal, I forgot who else that they traded for where they had to give up quite a bit of picks. Hassan Reddick, I think they gave up a 3rd round pick for, if I'm not mistaken, not this last season, but season prior. So you need draft picks because you kind of gave a bit too much to even get Aaron Rodgers. So you need to do that. And honestly, I don't know if with Sauce Gardner, I'm sure like you can get top dollar value for his age, his position with a good like team that is willing to like win now. Like you might be able to give him for Detroit, and Detroit might give you their whole draft class. Like that is a realistic possibility. Breece Hall, like we just talked about, like there's some teams out there that need running back help like desperately. And if you offer Breece Hall to some of these teams, they might be able to give a couple of good draft picks for these players at will, where you're going to have to build through the draft. There's no way around it. Like quarterback, you're going to draft, you're going to probably sign maybe a Marcus Mariota, maybe a Jacoby Myers, Jacoby Brissett, to like be some players that could help teach some people how to be NFL professionals. But there's nothing that you can do that's going to magically change anything. It starts with just, you know what, we're in a reset mode. We're going to go all in on reset. The only player that I'm keeping on the team is Garrett Wilson, because even with all the chaos with Zach Wilson and Aaron Rodgers, he was still very, very productive. But everybody else, I'm saying like they're up for sale. And then I'm drafting quality players for like offensive linemen. I'm really looking at that talent department, or at least our scout team. Like, what's a quarterback that we can go for that might be able to be, pan into something, like not a long shot, but like Jackson Dart. Is that a player that maybe we can look at in the second round that we can bring in and maybe we have some success with? Because there's no quarterback that is available right now that's going to save the Jets offseason. There is none. Absolutely none. Unless for some reason they fleece the Chiefs to get Patrick Mahomes, there's nothing the Jets team is going to do to get any sort of relevancy. So just go full into your rebuild and get as much assets, get as much cap space as you can to attract and show other teams that you're not, graded as an F when it comes to being a functional team. Like you need to win approval over by doing the right things, which is we have to start from scratch. We cannot continue this ship the way it is. Like it needs a complete overhaul.
A couple of quarterbacks I really like Will Howard and Kyle McCord, second, third round guys. I think those are a couple guys. Pair them with a veteran. Jets got Tyrod Taylor under contract still. Jason, no matter what the Jets do, management will mess it up. Ownership needs to be regulated. Time for the NFL to hold them accountable. If you stink, you cannot own a team.
Well, if that's the case, then Mark Davis would have had his team repossessed years ago. So it's a good thing we don't follow that trend.
Look, hopefully that maybe they implement that kind of rule. But next up, Miami Dolphins. For me, this is the easiest team to talk about. Offensive line draft, only offensive linemen, only sign offensive linemen. Somebody's got to pan out. You need to protect Tua. The guy's got too extensive of a concussion history to not have offensive line as the number one and only priority this offseason, both free agency and draft. I like Tyler Booker to the Dolphins in the draft, but Chris, what do the Dolphins need to do? Offensive line, obviously priority, but outside of that as well.
Oh, 100% offensive line. Assuming that Tyreek Hill's gone, as he said in his last interview, I say you also got to try and maybe get a wide receiver, assuming that they're going to be spending most of their higher picks on offensive linemen. With Tyreek being gone, they're currently 12th in cap. So, with Tyreek being gone, that would take a lot of fat off that. They could maybe go for a decent guy like DeAndre Hopkins or Amari Cooper or someone like that for wide receiver. Jalen Waddle's still there, obviously had a down year. Maybe go and try and get a guy like Mike Gesicki back at tight end. Austin Hooper as well is available. But yeah, I would say that they're the easiest to talk about because offensive line was their downfall. I think that they're a very, very middle of the road team. They're in a winnable situation where especially one team is not so much very good and another team is really, really bad. So I gotta say offensive line and some things to address on defense, but prioritize protecting Tua because they have shown clearly that he's their franchise quarterback and act like it. I have the same thing I have to say with the Jaguars too. You say he's your franchise quarterback, act like he is.
Cody, what do you want to see the Miami Dolphins do in free agency? And obviously protecting Tua needs to be their top priority.
100%. So if we're going to do that through the draft and maybe a couple of overpaid linemen in the respective free agency class, I think is a smart move. But another thing I think they should really prioritize that is just as high as they're addressing their offensive line is getting a backup quarterback that is going to keep you into games. Because I think 2 seasons in a row where Tua was out with an injury or a backup had to come in, honestly, like had they had just a serviceable backup that could keep afloat, they probably could have been in the playoffs for the last 2 years and respectable. But for some reason, they just don't find it a priority. They feel like having, what is his name, Skylar Thompson as a backup quarterback is a great idea. I think that they picked up Huntley, I think, off of the Ravens. That didn't go well. Like, they just need like a mature veteran quarterback. Like Jimmy Garoppolo would probably fit really well on the Miami Dolphins as a backup, not even to bring anything much more than value. Just like if Tua goes down, you at least have a quarterback that could continue to play, and he knows Mike McDaniel's offense. So I would see that as a signing. But for sure, just to touch on like Chris and what you're saying, Aaron, offensive line probably in this draft class is their number one priority. And honestly, too, like to get out of cap purgatory, I think there is a world where you dangle Tyreek Hill to a team that is willing to flip an offensive lineman and a couple of draft picks for Tyreek Hill, especially if they need a weapon desperately. I think that should be something that's on the table for Miami to still maintain some relevancy with their offense, because I think it's high-powered enough to where you can roll with it without Tyreek Hill, but you get an offensive lineman and maybe that shores up now the run game. So that way you're not chucking it 50-something times, and you can actually utilize some running backs to take the pressure off of Tua from dropping back and potentially injuring himself.
As far as like a veteran offensive lineman go, they're not going to have to pay too much. I think Brandon Scherf would be a pretty realistic signing. But Jason, with another kind of crazy take, trade Tua, draft a quarterback, and stock up on defense. Chris, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, you gotta, I have to say that I did see Skylar Thompson torch WVU when I was like a sophomore in college. So that was really fun. Saw that happen in Morgantown. Not a fun night for the Mountaineers, but in all seriousness, I don't know, because they've played their cards like Tua's the franchise guy, and you're not in a position where you're going to be able to draft an elite quarterback. This is a very weak quarterback class or free agency class. So what are you going to do? I mean, Tua is above serviceable. I'm not going to say he's elite, but he's definitely above serviceable when he's healthy. So I got to agree with Cody in the sense that you continue with Tua, but you get a backup who could be sustainable. Just a sustainable backup, not a Skylar Thompson, unless it's a random night in Morgantown, West Virginia,
Cody, I love that Jimmy Garoppolo shout. I was going to bring him up if you didn't, but what do you think of Jason's take that they should trade Tua, draft a QB, and stock up on defense? Because to me, that seems a little ridiculous, because you're functionally saying, hey, we're okay with being mediocre for a few years.
I mean, who are we trading Tua to? Like the Cleveland Browns to get the 3rd overall pick, or whatever their pick is, number 2, whatever pick that they're falling in.
Maybe Raiders potentially as well.
Okay, hypothetically, this is not going to happen, but let's just assume the Raiders did trade for Tua and they flipped the 6th pick over. They're still not going to get the top 2 quarterbacks, because in theory, Shedeur Sanders is going to be off the board, and Cam Ward probably is going to be, if not number 1, shortly thereafter. So I mean, it sounds like a novelty idea. I think that's why, like, get a serviceable backup for if Tua doesn't work out, because I think Tua could help lead this team. Like, he doesn't show me any signs of he's turnover prone or anything like that. If anything, when he is protected and he's got enough weapons around him, this team lights it up. They put up 70 against a team just last season. So they have good offense, and that Tua's a decent quarterback. But I think if you're going to trade him, then what's your backup option? You don't have one. So I wouldn't do so. It's kind of like very similar to like our topic with Trevor Lawrence. Like, I think realistically the Jaguars should think about, like, what do we want to do with Trevor Lawrence? I don't think this is the offseason to let him go, but I think in the future you should probably ponder that idea, because ironically enough, both Tua and Trevor have contracts that maybe they've earned or haven't earned. And now we need to figure out, like, are we going to keep you on the team if we're not successful, like what's this path looking like? But to do it right now, I think is really, really tough just because who knows what the market is for Tua. And also with the Dolphins, like I still feel like a couple of moves that Aaron, you've said, and Chris, you've said, they actually might be a very competitive team in the AFC in their division, and also like a wild card team in the AFC itself. So I don't want to just completely hit the reset button because I don't feel like the Miami Dolphins are there quite yet.
They're definitely not, but they're close. And when Tua's healthy, that offense is just flat out electric. They have speed everywhere. I think trading Tua would get their GM fired. That would get Mike McDaniels fired.
And it's probably going to happen if they don't. If let's just be honest, and I think we can all three agree on this. If the Miami Dolphins don't improve from an 8-9 record, which is what they finished with this season, if they don't look like a competitive playoff team this upcoming season, we can just agree that it's going to be a house cleaning show anyways. Mm-hmm. So why would we start it sooner than we need to? Let's retool, like what we're all kind of saying. Let's what's the term? Let's not rebuild, but oh my God, I'm flipping on the fuck. Excuse me. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. I'm flipping on the word that I'm thinking of, but it's like not rebuilding, but we're retooling, we're revamping. We're not completely taking it off, but what we're doing is we're adding just enough to get us over, which is what they were missing. So I think that's the smart play. And then if they lose their jobs, they lose their jobs. Like it probably will happen if they don't succeed anyways.
Revitalizing, I think, would be a good word for that.
I think that's the word I'm thinking
of.
But
I will say, I love Mike McDaniel. I love his character. I love his culture. I think that he really brings a unique perspective to the locker room, and the players really seem to like him. I do, unfortunately, have to agree that they'll probably be thinking about house cleaning, despite the fact that I don't think he's the problem. I just think that the front office is the problem, and the injuries, it's just bad luck. They've just had a string of bad luck, and I'd love to see Mike McDaniel back in the playoffs. So I've always been rooting for him since they've hired him.
And moving on to the last team in the AFC East, it's the Buffalo Bills, and Josh Allen obviously won MVP, but ran into his kryptonite that is Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs in the playoffs. They just can't get over the hump. They can do it in the regular season, but come postseason, when you got to go to Arrowhead, they just can't get it done. And just to bring this back up again, the play calling in that game was just infuriating for me. QB sneak to the left every single time on 4th and short, and they hardly changed it up, and that's what ended up biting them in the butt. But I think the Bills need to get some help on defense. You got to get pressure on the quarterback. Mainly Patrick Mahomes, put pressure on him, and like what we saw with the Eagles, get pressure on him and he can crumble, but you got to get guys in who can get it done. And wide receiver as well. Amari Cooper could be gone, didn't necessarily pan out like we were hoping. And they have negative cap space. So if they want to get a big time player, they're going to need to have some cap casualties. And I don't really know if they're going to be able to do that. Chris, what do you think Buffalo needs to do to get over the hump and make a Super Bowl?
I mean, it's hard because they're a fantastic team, and Josh Allen won his MVP with a not very good receiving core. I mean, with guys like Shakir, with guys like Amari Cooper, who's had a real big down year. It just didn't click there. Why? I don't know. I still think Amari Cooper is a fantastic receiver. It just did not click in Orchard Park. With the negative cap space, it's really hard to say because they need to address secondary. I mean, they're losing a safety and a cornerback. They're losing DeMar Hamlin. He's going to be a free agent. I don't know if they'll bring him back. Plus, they're losing Rasul Douglas, who is a fantastic safety, for another former Mountaineer. I know I'm biased, but he is legitimately a good safety. Address secondary, but the issue is you don't got the money to go for a guy like Justin Simmons, so don't know.
A name that I want to throw out there that would help on defense, linebacker. Chris, you were speaking about being biased, but Akeem Davis-Gaither, an App State guy, Bengals linebacker, he's going to be a free agent. You're not going to have to spend too much money on him, and I think he is very underrated as a linebacker. He'd come in and be a really solid piece for a defense that obviously needs help. But Cody, what does Buffalo need to do to get over the massive obstacle that are the Kansas City Chiefs?
I think, okay, if there's ever a time that we should probably not be timid in the offseason, probably this is the year to do it. And I think a couple of reasons is because now that Kansas City lost the Super Bowl, it feels like now that there is a little bit of a blueprint and they're a little bit more now vulnerable. And there's a potential for a Super Bowl hangover, which the Niners suffered from this past season. So I think that that's a legit thing. So if I'm the Buffalo Bills, and I know, Aaron, you just mentioned that they are kind of in cap purgatory, I would cut Von Miller or any of the older defensive players that they have and a couple of offensive players if they're overpaid, just to get that cap and to get on the other side of that cap level. And then what I would do is I would give whatever the Cleveland Browns asked for to get Myles Garrett. And then I would turn around to see what's the price for Chase Young, and I would acquire him as well. What they need is they need like a dual tandem on the edges. So whether that's Chase Young and Myles Garrett, Khalil Mack, and one or the other, like they need edge pressure so much it is sad. And I think if they were to get two solid edge rushers on that defense, they really don't even need to touch the offense very much. And they would be probably a Super Bowl contender because you get enough pressure on these quarterbacks like a Patrick Mahomes or Drake May in their division, Jalen Hurts, like they are going to be neutralized. Like we see that defenses that bring pressure neutralize whatever high flying offense that there is, just because when you don't give them time to develop their offense or the play, it negates all that. So I think if Buffalo is really, truly on the cusp of, okay, this is another one of those, this is our year, they need to go all in on defense. And I think Myles Garrett is a player that they need to like desperately acquire and also pair him with somebody else outside of that. And again, whether that's Khalil Mack or Chase Young would be a more ideal, or whatever other edge lineman that they can bring in, that needs to be high priority for the Bills.
And again, Bills are picking late in the first round, but this is a great draft class to need pass rushers in, because you got Mike Green out of Marshall, one of the highest graded defensive players in the entire country, if not the highest. You got Derek Harmon, D-tackle, phenomenal pass rusher, and Shamar Stewart out of A&M, who had an absolutely monster combine. Better 40 than Myles Garrett, better broad jump than Myles Garrett. Vertical is just about the same. Super explosive athlete. Would love to see him fall to Buffalo. I think that'd be phenomenal. But you mentioned Myles Garrett. We're talking about the Cleveland Browns next. And speaking of cap purgatory, they're second to last in the league, only to the Saints, negative almost $30 million, because they decided, hey, let's throw a disgusting amount of guaranteed money at Deshaun Watson. They're going to be moving on from Myles Garrett. That will obviously help with their cap problems. But Chris, what are the Browns doing? They obviously need to start the rebuild, but where do you think they will start?
Nothing. I hope they don't win a game next year. But I mean,
I'm cool with that. I'm cool with that.
But I hate them, one, because they're in the Steelers division, but two, because of the fact that they paid a very undesirable human being a lot of money. And I'm very happy that has basically set their franchise back generations.
It's karma.
Yep. You can't sign anyone. I'm not even going to mention any names. Like, who are you going to go to in free agency, even when you get rid of
come to Cleveland? Nothing's bad here. Come on over.
You're in a insurmountable division with a very good Ravens team, a very good, when healthy, Bengals team, a Steelers team that consistently beats elite teams at least a few times throughout. I'm not going to say we're a great team, but we still beat teams like the Ravens. We still have a chance to beat teams like Kansas City in the regular season. There's no appeal. So overall, they need to go quarterback. I can't say which one. I think that they just need to Bobby Bonilla, Val, who should not be named. And then the only other real point that I could have with them is just trying to go linebacker, because you're losing your once-in-a-generational linebacker. So, but nothing in free agency, because even after Garrett's contract is no more with that team, you still got Watson there. So holding them down like an anchor.
Cody, what do the Browns need to do to start this rebuild?
You know what? There's only three shorties in life, and that's death, taxes, and the Browns need a franchise quarterback. So there's nothing that they can do. I think, like what Chris said, they have so much money allocated to a quarterback who has seen the field, I think, less than a full season's worth of games. I don't think he's spent 20 games yet on the field for the Browns, and he still has every dollar guaranteed. So, very similar to like Chris's feelings, it's kind of on them. Like, you're in purgatory for however many years. Good luck. There's nothing that they can do that's gonna magically wave a wand that's gonna take away from everything that they've done. They're gonna lose players like Nick Chubb. They're gonna lose Jameis Winston, who was a nice shining light for them. It's gotta be very similar to when the Browns were just a laughing stock of the league from the early 2000s up until they got Baker Mayfield and kind of were relevant. And now they're just going to go right back to where they were. And it's unfortunate because I feel like if the Browns had made a couple of smart decisions and not signed, said unnamed quarterback, I think maybe they could have been a very good team in the in the AFC, which they were doing up until they decided, like, we need to sign this guy who hasn't played in 2 years and has a bunch of legal things hanging over him. Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. It was the most Browns decision I've ever seen in my life. The only other signing that I can see make sense to them is maybe they're a team that acquires Kirk Cousins, just because what else is there out there? Probably nothing. So,
and moving on to the Bengals, I feel like this is another team that's relatively easy to talk about. They got to fix that defense. Joe Burrow tried to will that team to the playoffs, and if he did, I think he would have won MVP. He had a phenomenal season. T. Higgins is obviously a free agent. I think you got to bring him back. And defense, you got to look at a Chase Young, Hassan Reddick, Charvarius Ward, Carlton Davis, those kind of guys, because the Bengals got some cap to play with. They got $56 million, and bring back BJ Hill as well. Keep some type of continuity on that defense, maybe a little bit. I don't even know if it's worth keeping continuity in, but Chris, obviously divisional rival, feels like they're a few players away from potentially winning that division with a kind of electric offense that they have with Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase. But what do you think they need to do in free agency to actually get back to the playoffs and be competitive?
I mean, Joe Burrow was the 5th most sacked quarterback in the NFL last year. It's a big reason why they lost that Super Bowl to the Rams. That's a big reason why they were struggling this year, even with Burrow having, in my opinion, an incredibly underrated year. I debated giving him my personal, not like it means anything, MVP vote after this past season. You got to protect him. You got to go tackle. You got to go guard. And you got to address that secondary, because the issues that pertained to their Super Bowl loss are the same issues that pertain to this incredibly disappointing season. So secondary, offensive line, and then just try and make sure that you keep Higgins and Chase in-house. You have cap to play with. You have a chance, but they were not that great for 1 year. And that's a good thing, because unlike the Steelers, you have a slightly better draft pick. So address that in the draft, address that in free agency, and I think that they could potentially topple Baltimore as the winner of that division.
And they have cap space to play with, but they're in a tricky situation with Trey Hendrickson. Only got him under contract for 1 more year, and he's going to want a big payday as well. So they've obviously got to think ahead of the future a little bit. Like, how much money do you want to throw at T. Higgins if Trey Hendrickson's going to be due for a significant extension next year, and the defense is already bad? So you got to retain your best defensive player. I think signing him to an extension is also a top priority this offseason. Not a new signing, but something that needs to be prioritized, because he was essentially the only bright spot of that defense. But Cody, what do you want to see Cincinnati do in free agency to get back into the playoffs?
I think they have a couple of interesting things that they can do that could actually make them relevant all over again. Because I think we can agree, and Chris, I know this is unfortunate because it's within your division, but had they had a solid defense, they probably would have won that division, just because their offense was putting up points. They just need to stop teams from scoring more than them, which is a lot of the time of why they lost. So first off, their priority needs to be, they need to re-sign Chase and Higgins. I think that's a non-negotiable. If they can't do both, they need to do both of those, because this offense is successful with both of them on the team. Obviously, Chase is at the top list of the priority. He needs to be paid. no questions asked. The season that he just had where he was the Triple Crown winner just solidified why he deserves a payday. And honestly, it probably cost the Bengals, because if they would have just signed him last offseason, it wouldn't have been not as expensive as what it's going to cost to sign him now. So that's just another note. But you got to sign them both, bring them both back to the team. I think you're going to be drafting offensive linemen, so that way you're young and you can bolster that a little bit and stay a little bit under the cap space. I would not be surprised if I see Joe Burrow restructure his deal to open up more cap space and go after defense. I'm very curious to see how serious the Bengals are in acquiring a couple of different defensive players. One of them in particular, Jair Alexander from Green Bay. Can you imagine adding him to this secondary? I think would be very, very good. And then if you have a little bit of cap space left, maybe adding a Khalil Mack or a Joey Bosa to that team. And now you've got the Bosa brothers in the same division. I think that makes it very interesting, especially when you have Hendrickson on the other side of it, pressuring. Now, not only do you have pressure defense, you have a cornerback who you can rely on to go after the number one guy, and you still have an offense that can put up points in bunches. So I think if the Bengals can just construct that offseason to be very similar to that, they could be a very dangerous team in the AFC. And Joe Burrow has been one of the quarterbacks in the AFC that can dethrone Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. So Joe Burrow is the guy that can do it. It's just he needs a ton of help. And the Bengals, if they're really serious for this, they need to make some moves that's going to help this team.
Mouthing off with Mike in the comments. Appreciate you watching, Mike. But Chris, we're moving on to your Steelers, and they got some cap room to play with, just under $54 million. Wide receiver. You need to get a reliable wide receiver to pair with George Pickens. Phenomenal talent in his own right. Obviously, some personality concerns that seem to be consistent with Pittsburgh wide receivers and the AFC North as a whole. I really don't understand it. It's like all the kind of slightly crazy and dirtier players come out of the AFC North. It's kind of funny, honestly. But, Chris, what do you want to see your Pittsburgh Steelers do? Do you want them to re-sign a Najee Harris or move on from him and look at a different running back?
I think it's time to move on from Najee, and I don't necessarily think he was bad, but my major issue with him is he was always trying to make more of a play than he was able to. He was trying to act like a Saquon Barkley or Travis Etienne, sitting in the backfield and trying to wait till those holes open, and that really works for guys like them. But for a heavy hitter like him, he needs to take a lot more of a Derrick Henry kind of strategy and just push through. He's a monster, but he really didn't do that. The Steelers' offensive line is still very good, and I'm still very much comfortable with where it's at. Overall, when it comes to running back, I wouldn't really necessarily say spend money, because you can get some guys in the lower rounds of the draft. But if we were to go for someone, J.K. Dobbins, he's been a great story coming back from injury. I wouldn't mind them going for a guy like him. But in all honesty with you, I got to say you got to go big or go home when it comes to spending money, because we are in purgatory when it comes to talent. How we are, we'll always win 10 to 12 games, but we're still never going to be good enough to compete with a very, very top heavy AFC. I still think we're going to win between 10 and 12 games next year and make the playoffs and get immediately embarrassed by a Baltimore or a Buffalo or a Kansas City again. And that means that you're going to have to utilize that cap space. I've heard a lot of talk about trading Minkah Fitzpatrick. He's a big cap hit. Yeah, and I could be okay with that as well, even though I'm wearing a George Pickens jersey right now as we speak. I wouldn't mind that. More value, get more picks. I don't necessarily think he's going to garner a lot of picks or a lot of high-quality picks, but consider trading Fitzpatrick. Consider maybe having a few down years and then coming back, drafting a quarterback, and then maybe going for a guy this offseason if we don't decide to tear it down, which they're not going to because it's Tomlin, the Steelers. Chris Godwin, we got the money. Go for it.
How would you feel about an Aaron Jones signing coming off of a 1,000-yard rushing season in Minnesota?
I wouldn't mind it, but the thing is that I just don't think they're going to do that. It would be nice. He's at a point in his career where he's been consistently good, but I just don't see them throwing that much money at a running back. I think they learned, we learned what happened with Le'Veon Bell. and we let him walk, which that was one thing. We're not that dumb when it comes to us as a franchise. I think you guys in all seriousness can agree we're pretty well run, but I wouldn't mind that. I just don't think they're going to do it.
And Cody, what do you think Pittsburgh needs to do to become a step above a 10-win team in a first-round playoff exit?
So I'm going to throw out a wild take that I think that if the Steelers would have kept Justin Fields, they probably would have won the same amount, if not more games. Because I actually think that he was very productive. I think Russell Wilson was a nice change of pace, but I think like if you give Justin Fields enough time to like learn the offense that Arthur Smith had kind of formed, and you know, Justin Fields was more confidently throwing the ball and making plays with his legs. I mean, sure, it was nice to see Russell Wilson, but at the end of the day, I think Justin Fields could have gotten 10 wins as well with the same offense and all that. So I think if I'm the Steelers, I look to keep Justin Fields. I think he's earned another contract to stay on the team. However, I've got two other quarterback options to compete with him, and I know that we love to hear that word compete when it comes to a young quarterback, but Daniel Jones is a quarterback I think that would be serviceable for an Arthur Smith offense, or Mac Jones. And I'm not saying that they're going to save the franchise. I'm just saying that in an Arthur Smith offense, they can be productive. They're not asked to do too much. And just with how it looked like with Russell Wilson and with Justin Fields, I think a couple of other quarterbacks that can stand in the pocket, deliver the ball, they can be on time with certain throws with that offensive line. I think that those are interesting quarterbacks to bring into the room to see like, okay, can we at least look like an offense that can move the ball down the field? George Pickens, I actually like as a player, but his antics are like very AB-like, and that makes me very, very nervous. I kind of feel like the Steelers need to add some veteran receivers to kind of help mentor him, because don't get me wrong, Mike Williams is not a mentor on anyone's team especially for like a George Pickens. I think you need like a Keenan Allen who can kind of take him under his wing and kind of see if he can help him grow up a little bit. I know that Keenan Allen's a little older, but he was productive in Chicago. I feel like he can be productive in Pittsburgh. Amari Cooper, he might not be a solid leader, but he's a presence that could be there. I would say like maybe DeAndre Hopkins can kind of help like stir Pickens in a decent directions. I think that's what could help the Pittsburgh Steelers. Their defense is very good. I actually think that if their offense is solid, their defense will hold it down, and that's what they proved this season. The defense gave up a lot of points because the offense wasn't able to put points on the board and was turning it over more so towards the end of the season, and that wasn't Justin Fields' fault. And if anything, like Russell Wilson, he's just not Mr. Unlimited. He has significant limitations, and that showed with Pittsburgh. So I feel like Pittsburgh is, again, very similar to like Cincinnati Bengals. Do a couple of moves, and they're very much in contention. And it's just like, okay, we're taking a huge gamble, but also let's make some smart moves, which is let's get a quarterback that can run this offense. Let's get some other pieces, because you got Calvin Austin III who's there, who's a very good receiver. Mike Williams, I don't know if you re-sign him, but get a player that is in the same realm as that, maybe a bit of an upgrade. And then George Pickens, I think you keep him on the team. I think this team could be a pretty solid team. In terms of running back, I would just draft a rookie running back and run with that. I think that'd be the smartest decision. I wouldn't overpay for an aging running back. Just draft one. They've got plenty of depth, and someone that is versatile in the pass game and the run game, I think would probably be best in this Arthur Smith offense.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I mean, even if we have to stick with Warren for a year, that wouldn't even be the worst case scenario. And my final point with the Steelers is I definitely agree with keeping Justin Fields. I really wanted us to roll with him anyway. I wasn't really big with bringing Wilson back, especially after his shaky beginning, but they did what they did, and I really hope that they do sign Fields. I think that would be a good idea, because I don't think he's going to garner an insane amount of money.
He's definitely not. I think 5-6 million, couple years, bringing back Fields seems pretty obvious to me. That would be the right move. And this is a deep running back class, not necessarily top heavy. I know supposedly some teams have Amara and Hampton over Ashton Genty on their boards, but second round I know. I was surprised to hear that as well. Second round, I think you're looking at one of the Ohio State guys, Quinshon Judkins, Travion Henderson. I think they could be there late second round for Pittsburgh. Phenomenal signing, both insanely talented running backs. I can acknowledge that even as a Michigan fan, even though Michigan was able to shut them both down, go blue. But Before we move on to talk about the Baltimore Ravens, Cody, I want to get your thoughts on what Jason said earlier about trading Pickens and moving up for a quarterback. Because to me, I don't think this is the class to make that kind of a move.
Well, and not only that, but again, I'm not a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. I do have family that is, and it just doesn't seem like a Pittsburgh move to trade up for a quarterback. They're very much a team that likes to find value in free agency and deep in drafts. I think that they can do that without trading George Pickens. However, if they feel like George Pickens has value and they want him off the team because of what he's doing for the team in terms of like attitude and team morale, like, sure, then let's trade him. But I think that, like, who else is going to step in at a George Pickens level and help be productive in an offense? And I hate to say, like, he's talented, which is why he should stay, but like, he has some immature antics, but he's not AB quite yet. And I think you can still keep him on the team and be productive. However, like, after this season, if he has another like temper tantrum, maybe we revisit that. But right now, I think for now, just keep it going. Let's see what we look like with a little bit of a change. Because Mike Tomlin, even though he seems to draft diva receivers, handles them pretty well, all things considered. And like, what other team is going to take Pickens and his attitude? I can't think of one team that's willing to take on that kind of persona, except for the Steelers.
And the show we're going to be talking about, the Baltimore Ravens, obviously ended up winning the division after Pittsburgh had another late season collapse that has become typical of the modern Steelers. But it feels like Baltimore's right there. They just need some pieces, shore up that defense, get a proper wide receiver 2 to pair with Zay Flowers. Rashad Bateman had a couple phenomenal games out of nowhere, but I don't know if he's going to be a wide receiver 2 for a Super Bowl contender. And to me, the Ravens are Super Bowl contenders. Derrick Henry, monster season. I think he's going to be due for another good season next year. Lamar Jackson arguably should have won MVP over Josh Allen. But Chris, even though they're your divisional rivals, what would you like to see Baltimore do in free agency to repeat as division champs and potentially make a deeper playoff run?
Well, I mean, you got to take pressure off Zay Flowers. I mean, he's their first ever Pro Bowl wide receiver, which that still just blows my mind that he was their first ever Pro Bowl wide receiver. That still really, really was wild to me. You got to address that. You got to give Lamar more help in general. I mean, we've seen the regression of Mark Andrews as well. I mean, how their season ended. I felt really bad for Mark Andrews. I genuinely like him as a football player, and watching that 2-point conversion at the end really was tragic, and it made me feel bad because I really didn't have a horse in that race, so to speak. I was kind of just like, I'm all right with both teams, whoever can beat Kansas City most. Overall, you got to address the elephant in the room, which is wide receiver. That's all the memes, all that. Lamar Jackson doing his own thing, and you got to continue to protect Lamar Jackson. Go for a guard, go for a tackle, go for a tight end. Just protect Lamar Jackson, give him weapons, and that division isn't anyone's. There's 3 teams that can contend for that division, but it could be yours.
They obviously did re-sign Ronnie Stanley as well. He's a free agent, but to your point about a tight end, Isaiah Likely is going to be their starting tight end eventually. I have full belief in his ability to be a quality starter in the league. Jason saying wide receiver help for Flowers, defense, where's the fear? And you need a field goal kicker. That's another thing we haven't touched on. Justin Tucker, not looking good for him, doing his best Deshaun Watson impression, and that's not somebody that you want to follow suit in a rough situation. They could move on from him as a cap casualty because they only have, $10.5 million in cap, and they need to bring in a couple big-time guys on defense and maybe a solid veteran wide receiver to take pressure off of Zay Flowers, like Jason and Chris have said. But Cody, what do you think Baltimore needs to do to make a Super Bowl run?
I think what I would like to see them do is I would like to see them acquire Sauce Gardner from the Jets. He feels like he needs to be on the Ravens. Like, that would be a very good defensive piece that they could use for their linebacking core, for their interior. I feel like you put Sauce Gardner on this team, and they just went from like a top 5 defense in the NFL, in my opinion. Another, obviously on the offensive side of the ball, Jason's right. Chris, I mean, I'm sure you're going to mention this as well too. They need desperate receiving help. And obviously Isaiah Likely is going to be the number 1 tight end over Mark Andrews. Maybe they cut him or trade him for some value. But I would like to see Devontae Adams get on the Ravens. I think that they need somebody like a veteran receiver who is an elite route runner. Amari Cooper, sure. Like, I think in terms of age, it'd make more sense. But I think Devontae Adams would fit perfectly in this offense. Another swing, though, that I would like to see the Baltimore Ravens do, though, if they're really serious about like bolstering, because honestly, not a ton that they need to do, just a couple of tweaks here and there. And I'd really like to see them acquire a cornerback. Like I said, Sauce Gardner, I think, would be my pick for them. I'd like to see if they're in the market for Brandon Ayuk from the 49ers, because it's been reported that he's now on the market. Brandon Ayuk, who just got a new receiving deal, now it's probably under market value considering like the other talent that's going to be garnering like more of an annual contract. I think he's now valuable enough to where you bring him in and now you pair him next to Zay Flowers. I think that is a pretty significant upgrade on terms of the offense. And I'm very curious if they make some of those moves, how dangerous now are the Ravens in the AFC?
And I think that'll do it for this AFC free agency episode of the Gridiron Address. We will be back next week with another full first-round mock draft post-combine. Obviously, a lot to talk about there. Some guys flying up draft boards. Like I said earlier, Shamar Stewart, monster combine. Mike Green didn't test at the combine, but look at what he did at Marshall last season. I think he's going to be a first-round pick for sure. So stay tuned for that. Maybe I get Chris back on as well. Cody, you're more than welcome to come on as well. And Shannon, of course, I want to bring him back for that. But thank you all for watching and sticking around for this hour-and-a-half long show, and I hope everybody has a good rest of their night.